Hello, so today I'm going to be working on a pair of stays. I actually am filming all of this kind of after I've made everything because I finally have a temporary tooth again. I have to wait about 3 months for the permanent one, so I have a temporary one right now, but it's kind of causing me to lisp, so if my voice sounds funny, I'm sorry. Hopefully it'll be fixed eventually. The stays that I'm going to be making this week are by Lunneth on Instagram, and she has made 2 stays patterns, and this one is her newest one, the LSDs. I actually chose to make this one because after I went to that photo meetup a couple months ago, a few of us decided to make like a sewing book club kind of thing. It's not a book club, it's just a sewing club, but kind of like the same concept as a book club where we all make the same project and then discuss it. So that's what I've made this past week, and I'm super excited about it. I think the pattern's really cool. I definitely recommend it, and I'm really excited to see what everybody else makes. They haven't made theirs yet. I was the first to make mine because I had the YouTube deadline to deal with, so that is what we're doing this week. So let's go get started. I'm ready.
Oh dear. Hi. Wow. If you sit, she'll be much more. I'm sorry. She
okay.
Just don't reward her for that.
She just licked my camera.
She's like, oh, I don't know what that is.
Huh? We're at Joann's. This is a massive Joann's. Doing things. I like the butterflies. That's cute.
I want to wear this every day of my life.
Okay, these are my options. Got a blue bee, got a green bee, got some green foxes, some yellowish flowers, and some Thanksgiving looking fabric. So probably not that one. Cool. I've decided.
I think this one is so cool.
It's got bugs on it. Look at that. This is the winner for me.
Excellent.
We're still picking Maggie's. Alright, well this is going to be very short fitting because this fits pretty perfectly. So I don't have any boning in it, so I didn't pull it like super tight, but pretty much I think it looks pretty good. The lacing gap is a little bit small at the bust, so like maybe that could be taken in a little bit so that I have more of an even gap all the way down. But like this is about 2 inches. The hip is also maybe a little bit too big, but like it's pretty okay. So I might not change anything because I can probably pull this in tighter once I have actual boning throughout, so that'll make the lacing gap more even. But I haven't put any boning in here. I think that it looks really good. It's staying pretty stable. That's a pretty good sign. It's buckling a little bit at the waist because I don't have the boning in here, but once I get boning, this will fit like pretty perfectly. So I'm not gonna make changes, I don't think. If I really want like a full 2-inch gap at the back, I could always like put in some bust inserts. That said, it is kind of low down on my bust. Like the apex of my bust is right above the neckline, but I don't think I mind because I'll probably always wear this with a shift. This is not the kind of thing that I'm just gonna wear by itself. I didn't cut any of the tabs open. I left those because I didn't want them to stretch out at all. Functioning fine how they are. They'll function even better once they're actual like cut open tabs, so that's good. The straps are a good length. They're like right where they should be. It's a little bit wide at the front, but I think because it is lower on the bust, that's okay because it's kind of like, I don't know, cupping the whole bust line, if that makes sense. So normally I like the straps to be a little bit farther in, but usually I'm making stays that come a little bit higher up, so I think the way that this like frames the bust, I guess, looks just fine, and it's not like in my armpit like the previous stays that I made, the tapestry stays. I didn't like how far those were going into my armpit, but this is like, it's low enough that it's not going to cut into my armpit. When I actually make this will be open maybe like 3 inches and laced shut, but functionally it should act like it's shut, so I just stitched it all the way down. I didn't put boning in it just because I didn't feel like it, so that was do as I say, not as I do kind of moment, because you should bone it how you're going to bone it in the final product. And just by like pressing down on it just a little bit, I can tell that like it is basically a perfect fit. Lunneth is the girl who made this pattern, and I think we probably have a fairly similar torso length because it's hitting me like basically at exactly the right place on my waist and like on my hips. So yay, I don't need to make any changes, so that's always good. I love it when that happens. It's low cut in the back, which is how I like it. This is like basically my perfect stays pattern, so 10 out of 10 recommend, especially if you are shaped like me. Then this is a really good pattern. Cool. I think this is the first pattern that I haven't had to make any alterations to at all. So yay for that. Cool. Let's get to cutting then. Oh. So a couple things to note about this pattern. For one, it's done a little bit differently, and I am following her directions just to like go through and see how her directions are, but it's done a little bit differently than how I normally do kind of like sandwiched boning channels. So when I do boning channels where I use a tape instead, then I do stitch all of the inner boning channels like through here that aren't going to intersect a seam while all the pieces are separate. Normally when I do sandwiched boning channels, so ones that involve 2 layers of fabric, normally I'll do all of that after I've put the entire corset together and like sandwich the 2 layers together. She has you doing all of the boning channels on the like interior part before you put all of the pieces together. It does make it a little bit easier. It's less to maneuver. I guess I prefer to do it the other way usually because it means that I can pattern match everything without worrying about them shifting in any way, so that I know that the marked seam lines are still going to be the same even with these 2 together. Because like while I'm sewing this, like this obviously can get kind of like shifted off course, and who knows if the seam lines that I originally marked are actually matching up between the top layer and this cotillion layer. Both ways work, so it's not really a huge deal. It's just because I have so much pattern matching, I usually would prefer to do it so that I'm stitching everything and can match all these patterns really well. We're gonna give it a try this way because I don't usually make it like this. So, the second thing to note is that when you are stitching these boning channels together, because you have 2 layers of fabric, you want the outer fabric to be slightly larger than the inner fabric. So as I was sewing, I was kind of like rolling it together so that this pattern fabric does end up taking up a little bit more space, and when it sits on the body it's gonna want to sit smoothly, because like if you look at it flat, I don't know if you can tell, but it kind of bubbles between the boning channels and like between the stitch lines when it's just completely flat. But once it's around my body, this will like lay really smoothly. That was also why I pinned everything on the bucket. Like you could just do one or the other, but I do both just to be extra safe. The last thing I wanted to note was what you do when you have a boning channel that kind of runs into the side of a boning channel rather than it running off into the seam allowance. So you don't want to do a bunch of back stitching at each of the ends of the boning channels because it makes it look kind of messy and sloppy. I mean, you can do it that way, but it looks cleaner to do it the way that I'm about to show you. So when you get to the end of the boning channel, you want to just leave a long tail. That way you can pull it up, like you can pull the threads up like this. And what that does is it brings up a little loop, and that's the thread end from the other side of the fabric. So pull those ends to the back so they're not showing on the front. So with those ends like that, then you can just tie them in a knot. And those are really neatly tied off, so I'm just gonna clip them. And you can leave them a little bit long because this is gonna get a lining over it, so that'll just be completely hidden later. And that makes this side of it really clean and neat, and like you can't tell that there was like a loose end there anyways, because it just goes straight to the back. And this is less important on this kind of fabric where it is really busy and you're not gonna see much imperfections of the stitching because there's so much pattern going on, but it's really important on things that are like a solid color, or especially on corsets that are made of like a satin. I did this technique on my Hannah Alexander Ellis corset, I'll link that video, but it makes it so that everything looks really neat from the front and is very secure from the back. And those are my tips for stitching stays together like this. Let's keep going. Here are these two back pieces. Some together is a little bit tricky to sew, so I'm gonna explain how I do that. First, basically, I just do this long side here, and then once I've got that stitched, then I'll do this short side here, so I will show you how I do that. I'm gonna match up the outer point of the smaller piece to the inner point of the larger piece, so like that. I've already snipped it because I used this for my mock-up as well, but it should be fine because I've got the outer fabric also keeping it strong, so it'll be fine. This will get snipped ultimately, but we want to make sure that it has enough, I don't know, integrity to not fall apart while I'm wearing it. Ideally, you would snip it after you've stitched it. So now that I have this long seam stitched, I can do the short seam. I need to clip it before it will like contort itself around for this. So I'll just do that now, and you want to clip just to this corner. Don't go past it or you'll have a hole. But you also want to make sure you actually get all the way to the corner, otherwise it's not going to turn nicely. So then I just flip this over. And when you're stitching, you don't want to go past this point either, otherwise it'll obviously go into the body of the garment. So you want to make sure you're stitching right to that corner. Something else I did a little bit differently from her instructions is that I put all the boning in after I put all the pieces together. Her instructions say to put the boning in first and then sew the pieces together, but I think it's easier to sew the pieces when there isn't a bunch of stuff holding it all like stiff. So did that, but now I've got all the boning in so I can attach it to the lining. I think that this project turned out really well. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'm filming the intro and outro for this video at the same time because I wanted to wait till I had a replacement tooth so it wasn't just like a hole in my mouth. But I'm filming this at the same time as the intro. But I'm really happy with how they turned out. I think they're super cute. The only qualms that I had with this project were all on me and not on the pattern. I think that Lunneth did a really great job with this pattern. It fits me super well. Obviously that kind of depends on the person making it and who is wearing it because not all of our bodies are the same. But we did try the mock-up on Maggie. Maggie is Zombie Spaceship on Instagram and TikTok. But we tried it on her as well and we made the same size and it fit both of us, and we're definitely not the same size. So it seems to be a really good universal pattern, and I think it's very cute. My biggest qualms with the project that I made was, for one, I picked another upholstery fabric, which is not a good choice. As I was going around the tabs, it was fraying a lot, so I kind of had some issues there. And then, like I did on the tapestry stays as well, I went kind of back and forth between hand sewing and machine stitching it because I was getting frustrated on how long the hand stitching took. But then when I was on the machine, I got really frustrated with how inexact it was because it's kind of hard to maneuver everything on the machine when you're going around so many like curves and corners and everything. I would kind of switch back and forth, and obviously that's not the prettiest way to do it because the stitching is kind of inconsistent. I kind of wish that I had just done it all by hand because it's definitely prettier that way and I have a lot more control. I think in future projects, for one, I don't really like doing tabs, so I'm gonna try to avoid stays with tabs in the future. But in the case that I cannot avoid stays with tab, I think I really need to dedicate an entire day to doing the tabs. I keep trying to do them kind of like at the end of a day after I've already been sewing a lot, and I'm like, oh, this will be a great like sitting in front of the TV at night kind of project, and it takes longer than an evening. So I think I need to dedicate an entire day or maybe even 2 days if I have the leisure of time. That is what I would like to do in the future. I asked on Instagram what color of binding I should do, and Instagram said green, but I think that I would have liked it better if I did black. So I don't know, maybe I will take this binding off eventually and rebind it, but I don't know if these stays can actually handle that because it is kind of shredding a little bit. It's just a design thing, and I don't think it looks bad. It makes it look kind of extra Halloween-like. However, I think if I had bound it in black, I would have gotten more use out of it. It does mean that I just need to work a little bit harder to coordinate with this with other clothing since I don't really own that much in that shade of green. Most of my greens are kind of more blue tinted and are a lot darker, whereas this is a very like bright green. So maybe eventually I'll come up with more clothing that matches that and it won't be a problem. But I did struggle a little bit coming up with clothing to match for this witch look. I also did not like actually anticipate using this for a witch look. It just so happened that Maggie had wanted to dress up as witches that day, and I was like, oh great, I can knock out 2 things at once, hang out and dress up as witches and also get my reveal done. So that was why I dressed up as a witch. But now we have some like pre-Halloween content, so hope you guys like Halloween. It's my favorite time of the year. I mentioned before that I did the steps in slightly different order, and I think it would still work if I had done it in the order that she had suggested, and I did follow a lot of her instructions more by her order than what I would normally do, and I think it worked out really great. I just know that sometimes there are things that I like to do, like adding all the boning after I put everything together because it makes it easier for me to sew everything together under the machine. Personal preference, if you don't mind sewing the pieces together when there's already boning in it, if you have a really long arm for your sewing machine, then that will work out just fine for you. But I think if you've got a home machine, and like even with my industrial machine, it was easier to put the boning in after I've already stitched all of the corset pieces together. I think that's mostly the only change that I made besides sewing the binding on by machine in parts. Like, do it by hand, it just looks nicer. But other than that, I followed her instructions and they're very good. She's very thorough and her pattern's really good, so would recommend. This is probably my favorite one besides the first 1780 stays by Red Threaded that I did last year around this time. But that one I did make quite a few changes to, I think. So this one was great without any changes. So that's all I've got for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you have any questions about the process of making these stays, or like you are also making these stays, let me know. I would love to hear about it. Oh, and if you want to see the rest of my videos, we have a lot of Halloween and like Renaissance Festival stuff coming up in the near future. then please subscribe. I hope to see you guys in the next video. Okay, bye.